Arizona Territory. Spring of 1879, the wind carried dust and the scent of creosote as Kierra Braddock ran hard beneath the pale eye of the moon. Her boots were soaked from the shallow river she had crossed an hour back. Her skirts were torn. She had not dared to slow down since slipping out of her father's house near Prescott, leaving behind her corset, her hairpins, and the man her father had promised her to, a man with cruel hands and dead eyes. Kierra's breath caught in her throat as she paused at the edge of a ridge, the land dipping into open desert below. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears like hooves. She had no map, only a general sense of where west was. West meant escape. West meant freedom. She gripped the small satchel pressed to her chest. Inside was a loaf of bread, a flask of water, and a folded letter her mother had written before she died, a letter that ended with the words, "You are braver than you know." Kierra closed her eyes. "I hope you're right." A sudden snap of twigs behind her made her whirl. But it was only a jackrabbit disappearing into the brush. Still, she did not wait. She kept moving, each step pushing her further from her old life. By midnight, her legs began to shake. The desert stretched empty around her, except for one glimmer in the distance, a soft yellow glow. A light. She hesitated. Could be anyone. But she had no more water, and her body was starting to sway from exhaustion. She stepped toward the light. The closer she got, the more it revealed a small homestead tucked between two hills, a weathered barn beside it, and a single lantern swaying on a hook. A man stepped out of the barn, tall and broad-shouldered, wiping his hands on a rag as he glanced toward her. He stilled when he saw her. She froze, breathing hard. The man lowered the rag slowly. "You all right, miss?" he asked. His voice was deep but calm, with a quiet edge of concern. Kierra barely got the words out. "I need help." He crossed the yard in long strides, stopping a few feet from her. His face was partly shadowed by the lantern, but his eyes were sharp and steady. "I'm Boone Lark," he said. "You hurt?" She shook her head. "Just tired." He looked her over her torn skirt, her bare arms scratched from brush, her eyes rimmed red with dust and tears. Then, without pressing her, he said, "Come inside. I have water and coffee. You can sit down a while." Kierra hesitated again, but something in his stance, open, grounded, not pushing, made her nod. Inside, the cabin was sturdy and simple. A small fire crackled in the hearth. The scent of pine smoke and strong coffee filled the air. Boone poured her a tin cup of water first, then ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table. She sat slowly, hands trembling as she drank. Boone leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You running from something?" Kierra stared at the flames. "Someone." He nodded once, like he understood more than he said. "You safe here? No one comes by this way much." She looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" Boone's jaw moved once, like he was thinking. "Because someone lit a lantern for me once too. They said little else that night." Boone offered her the cot near the fire, and she fell asleep before she could even thank him. When morning came, she found him outside feeding a chestnut mare, the sun painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. "You planning on going back?" he asked without looking at her. "No," he nodded. "Then you're gonna need better boots." She blinked. "You're not going to ask who I am?" He finally turned to her. "You already told me what matters. Someone was hurting you. You left. That's enough." Kierra stared at him. "I was supposed to marry a man named Silas Grant. My father arranged it. He never asked what I wanted." Boone's mouth tightened. "And what do you want?" "I don't know yet. I just know it's not that." A silence stretched between them, but it was not heavy. It was the kind of silence that gave room to breathe. Boone stepped toward the barn. "Come on. I'll show you how to feed the chickens." She followed him, unsure why her chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. The days passed quietly. Boone never pushed her to talk. He taught her how to saddle a horse, how to shoot a rifle, how to patch a fence. She found herself smiling more, laughing softly when he muttered at his stubborn mule, or when the chickens tried to peck his boots. One afternoon, while fixing a gate, she caught him watching her. Not with pity, not with possession. just watching like she was something steady and real. What? She asked, brushing hair from her cheek. Boone looked away with a faint grin. You look like you belong here. Her heart skipped. Do I? Feels like it. That night, she sat beside him on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stars were sharp above them, and a coyote howled far off. Did you ever love someone? She asked. He was quiet for a long time. I thought I did once. She left. Said I was too quiet, too slow. I like your quiet, Kierra said before she could think better of it. His head turned just slightly. I like your fire. Her breath caught. She looked down at her hands. Boone's voice was softer now. You can stay here as long as you want, or leave when you're ready. Either way, I'll help you. Kierra looked up at him. What if I want to stay? His hand brushed hers, light as wind. Then stay. She did. Weeks passed. The land warmed. She planted seeds with him in the garden. She sewed new shirts from fabric he bought in town. He taught her to ride his mare, and she taught him to make stew that did not burn. And one morning when she woke to find him chopping wood shirtless in the pale dawn light, something shifted between them. Later, when she handed him coffee, their fingers touched. This time, she did not pull away. Their eyes met. He set the cup down. Kierra. She stepped closer. I am not afraid anymore. He cupped her cheek, thumb brushing gently against her skin. You never had to be. She kissed him. It was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was steady like everything else between them. Like the ground underfoot. And when he pulled her into his arms, she knew. This was the man who lit the lantern. This was real love. The morning after the kiss, Boone didn't mention it. He poured her a mug of chicory brew and passed her a slice of cornbread, same as always, but his thumb brushed hers when he handed over the tin plate. Kierra noticed the way his eyes lingered a second longer than usual, how his voice caught faintly when he asked if she'd seen the crows picking at the seed row. They didn't speak of it, but something had shifted, a hush under the surface of everything, like the moment before rain. Later that day, they rode out to mend the north fence where a stretch of wire had sagged between two posts. The sky was cloudless, the sun sharp. Boone handed her the wire cutters and knelt to dig out a new post hole. You ever been to Flagstaff? Kierra asked, unspooling a length of wire. Couple times, Boone said, pressing his boot into the shovel. Mostly for supplies or if I needed the smith. Why? Just wondering what's beyond here, she said, twisting the wire until it bit into the wood. Not that I want to leave. He paused, leaning on the shovel. There's more people, more noise. Less sky. But if you ever want to see it, I'd take you. Kierra looked up at him. I'd rather stay where there's room to breathe. He nodded once, then returned to digging. By late afternoon, they had the wire taut and the post firm. Boone wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, then glanced at her. You learn quick. I listen, she said, brushing dirt from her knees. And I don't scare easy anymore. He blinked, then looked down at the shovel. That mean you'd stay through monsoon season? Would you still feed me cornbread if I did? For as long as you want it. She smiled but didn't answer. She didn't need to. That evening, Boone brought in a cedar branch to burn. The scent filled the cabin, rich and sharp. She sat by the hearth, stitching a tear in her blouse. He moved about the room, checking the window latches, oiling the hinges on the door, tying back the curtain where a draft had crept in. You always keep things so tidy? She asked, not looking up. Used to be Messier, he said, straightening the salt tin on the shelf. Then I figured if I was alone, I ought to at least be decent company to myself. Kierra glanced at him. You're better company than most men I've known. He didn't look back, but his voice was low when he said, you make this place feel less empty. She folded her hands in her lap, thread trailing like a ribbon across her knee. I never knew how quiet could feel safe until now. He turned then, slowly, and came to stand beside her. I don't know what you want from life, Kierra, but you could build it here if you wanted. With me. She met his eyes. I want to learn what it means to belong somewhere because I chose it. Not because someone told me to. Boone crouched beside her, resting his hand near hers on the wooden floor. Then choose this. Not just the place. Me. She set down the needle. I already have. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers gentle against her palm, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Outside, the wind shifted, stirring the dry grass. The cabin held stillness, not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that settles when two hearts finally find their home. In the days that followed, Boone taught her how to read the wind by the way the dust lifted off the hills. Kierra found a spot near the creek where wild mint grew, and she began drying the leaves for tea. She cleared a patch of ground behind the barn and started planting squash and beans, humming as she worked. One afternoon, Boone returned from town with a parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. He set it on the table without a word. Kierra opened it slowly. Inside was a bolt of deep blue calico, soft under her fingers. "It's beautiful," she said. "Figured you might want something of your own choosing," he said, eyes flicking to hers and then away. She looked down at the fabric. "Also a dress. Not because I have to wear one. Because I want to." Boone's mouth curved just slightly. "I'd like to see that." She touched his hand, then rose onto her toes and kissed his cheek. He closed his eyes just for a second. That night, as they sat on the porch, a slow rain began to fall. Kierra held a blanket around her shoulders, Boone's arm resting lightly behind her. "I used to think love meant losing yourself," she said, watching the drops gather on the railing. "And now?" he asked. She turned toward him. "Now I think it means finding someone who lets you be more of who you are." He looked at her then, long and steady. "That's what you are to me, Kierra. More." She leaned into him, and he wrapped the blanket tighter around them both, holding her close as the rain softened the earth around them. By mid-May, the heat pressed low across the land, and the cottonwoods along the wash had turned a deeper green. Each morning, Boone rose before the sun and worked until the light grew harsh, while Kierra dug her hands into the soil behind the barn, coaxing young shoots from the earth. She had claimed the small lean-to at the side of the cabin for her sewing, where she'd begun cutting the blue calico into panels and pleats, humming under her breath when the wind wasn't too loud. One afternoon, while Boone was oiling harnesses under the shade of the awning, he heard her pacing behind the cabin. She wasn't singing. He rounded the corner and found her standing still, one hand clutching a letter, the other braced on the wall. "Ryder came through," she said without turning. "Drop this off. My father's seal." Boone stepped closer but didn't reach for her. "You read it." "Twice." She held it out without looking. "He says Silas is still looking. That I've brought shame. That I'll regret this." Boone didn't touch the paper. "You believe him?" She let her hand fall. "I believe he wants me afraid." The wind stirred her hair, pulled strands loose from the braid she'd tied tight at dawn. Boone watched her for a long moment, then said, "He doesn't get to decide what your regret looks like." She turned then, jaw tight. "I'm not going back. That hasn't changed." "I didn't think it had," Boone said. "But if a man like Silas is still searching, we ought to be ready." Kierra nodded. "He'll have money. Men." Boone didn't smile. "So do the railroad barons. Doesn't make them right." She crossed her arms. "You'd stand between us?" "I'd stand beside you." Later, while she boiled water for canning, Boone saddled the mare and rode south to speak with Sam Wren, a rancher with a wide spread and a good eye for trouble. Kierra spent the afternoon marking the fence posts with white paint, one every 50 feet, a signal Boone had taught her to use if she ever needed to draw him back from the fields fast. When he returned at dusk, his shirt dusty and his eyes squinting from the long ride, he dismounted with a quiet grunt and handed her a small bundle wrapped in canvas. "Found this at Wren's place," he said. "Figured if we're expecting trouble, you ought to have a better sidearm." Inside was a Colt .36 Navy, the grip smoothed from years of use but well kept. Kierra ran her fingers along the brass. "I've never fired one like this," she said. "You will tomorrow. First light." That night she didn't sleep right away. She lay beneath the thin quilt, watching the fire die down, listening to the small sounds Boone made as he moved about the room pouring water. setting down his belt, unbuckling his boots. "Do you think he'll come here?" she asked. Boone didn't answer right away. "Then, if he does, he won't find you the same." She sat up, the quilt pooling at her waist. "What do you mean? You're not the girl who ran in the dark. You're the woman who planted a field and patched a roof and taught a man how to laugh again." She stared at him. "And what are you now?" He crossed the room, crouched beside her. "I'm the man who'd burn the whole damn desert before I'd let anyone take you." Her breath hitched. She touched his chest, just above the bone where his heart beat steady. "You don't have to fight for me, Boone." "I know," he said, "but I will." The next morning, true to his word, he taught her to shoot. Not with soft hands or indulgent praise, but with the steady patience he gave horses. She learned stance, breath, the weight of the hammer under her thumb. By noon, she could hit a bottle at 30 yards. A week passed with no riders, no dust trails, no signs of Silas. But the letter lingered in the drawer of the sewing table, and sometimes Kierra would run her fingers across it before folding it back up again. One evening, while Boone was sharpening his knife on the porch, she stepped outside with a piece of folded muslin and sat beside him. "I've been thinking about a new name," she said, watching the blade catch the light. "Not to hide, just to begin." Boone didn't look up. "What are you thinking?" She unfolded the muslin. On it she had embroidered the word Braddock, then crossed it out. Beneath it, in a different thread, she'd stitched the name Lark. "I'd like to take your name," she said, "if you'll give it to me." Boone set the knife aside. "You sure? I'm not asking for a wedding right now," she said. "Just the promise of one, when it's time." He reached over, took the muslin from her hands, and folded it once. Then he kissed her knuckles, the gesture slow and sure. "You already have it," he said. That night, after the fire burned low, they lay close beneath the open window. The night air was warm, carrying the scent of sage and horses. "I used to think freedom meant being alone," she whispered. Boone didn't move, but his voice came quiet. "And now I think it means having a place you don't have to run from." He kissed her temple, his hand resting over hers. "You've got that now," he said, and she believed it. The first storm of June rolled in just after dusk, not with thunder but with wind-long, low gusts that rattled the shutters and pressed grit against the windows. Kierra stood barefoot on the porch, arms folded, watching the sky darken to slate. Boone pulled the last saddle in from the rail and shut the barn doors, his shirt clinging to his back from the heat that hadn't yet broken. "We'll get rain by morning," he said, brushing hay dust from his fingers. She nodded but didn't go inside. "Do you ever miss your people?" Boone leaned against the post beside her, boots creaking on the boards. "My uncle raised me after my folks passed. He was a quiet man, taught me how to keep stock alive through drought and how to listen more than I speak. I think about him sometimes, but I don't miss the loneliness of it." "You were alone out here a long time," she said, her voice soft beneath the wind. "Long enough to stop thinking much about it." He glanced at her. "Until you turned up in the dark." She looked toward the hills, their outlines vanishing in the coming storm. "I've been thinking about what it means to be chosen, to be picked like stock at auction, like I was back in Prescott. It's not the same as being loved." He didn't speak right away. Then, "You're not something to be claimed. You're someone I want to build with." Kierra leaned her shoulder against his. "Then let's build something." Before dawn, the rain came. Steady, quiet, soaking the dust into mud. Boone rose early and took the lantern down from its hook, the one he'd left burning the night she arrived. He cleaned the chimney glass and trimmed the wick, setting it by the window. Kierra found him there, wiping soot from his hands. "You still keep it lit?" "It's part of the place now," he said, "like the well or the field. Can't imagine it gone." She stepped closer. "I want to marry you, Boone." He turned fully. "You sure? I don't want a pastor or a ceremony. Just you and me and the land that gave us back to ourselves." He reached into the drawer by the hearth and pulled out a silver ring, simple and worn smooth, looped on a strip of leather. My uncle's. He never used it, but kept it just the same. Boone slipped it onto her finger, his hand steady. Then we're wed, Kierra Lark. As honest and binding as the mountains. They didn't speak much that day. Didn't need to. She cooked rabbit with wild onions, and he carved a handle for the hoe she'd cracked on the rocks last week. By evening, the sky had cleared and the first shoots of corn were pushing through the rows behind the barn. After supper, Kierra sat cross-legged on the porch, the hem of her dress damp from the rain-soaked boards. Boone joined her with 2 mugs of mint tea, their knees brushing. I've been thinking about going into town next week, she said, tracing the rim of her cup. There's a schoolhouse there. They need someone to help with the younger ones. You want to teach? Not full-time. Just lend a hand. I think it would feel good to be useful beyond the fence line. Boone nodded. You've got a way with people. Even the mule listens when you talk. Kierra laughed gently. I'd ride in after sunrise and be home before dark. I'll walk you to the ridge, he said. Every time. She rested her head against his shoulder, the ring cool against his shirt. I never wanted a man to follow me, Boone. Only one who'd walk beside me. You've got that now. The wind had stilled. Crickets rose in chorus and the stars blinked out one by one across the sky. Below them, the lantern glowed soft in the window, its flame sure and steady. June settled into the land with a quiet certainty, longer days. Cracked earth softening under deep roots. The wild mint behind the barn sent up pale blossoms, and the beans, once no more than sprouting hope, now clung to their stakes with stubborn tenacity. Kierra ran her fingers along the vines each morning, the cool leaves brushing her knuckles like small, private prayers. One morning just after sunrise, Boone stood at the edge of the property, eyes narrowed against the slope beyond the ridge. He didn't speak when she came up beside him, her braids still damp from washing. His jaw was tight in a way she hadn't seen since the day he read her father's letter. Hoof prints, he said, pointing to a bend in the trail where the soil held the shape of a shod horse. Fresh. One rider. She crouched beside the tracks, noting the angle, the depth. She didn't need to ask who. Boone's silence was answer enough. He looked down at her. You want to go to town, we'll go today. Together. No, she said, rising. I won't be chased back behind walls. If he comes, he'll see I've made a life here. That I'm not his to summon. Boone nodded once, then walked back toward the barn to ready the rifle he kept oiled but rarely touched. By late afternoon, the rider came into view, a man in a slate coat atop a chestnut gelding cutting a slow line across the lower field. Boone stood near the porch, rifle loose in hand. Kierra stepped out beside him, not behind. The rider dismounted and tied the horse at a distance, removing his hat with a practiced ease. His face was clean-shaven, features sharp with the kind of pride that had once filled every corner of her father's house. Kierra, he said, tipping his head once. Silas Grant sent me. He's offering you one last chance to return with your dignity intact. Boone didn't move. You've come far. You can turn around now. The man's eyes flicked to Boone. This doesn't concern you. Kierra took a step forward. It concerns him. And it concerns me. I left because I was told what to be, not asked who I was. I've chosen my life, and I've chosen my husband. The man's throat shifted. He'll ruin your name, Kierra. Print lies in the papers. Your father's already working with the sheriff in Prescott. She met his gaze steady. Let them. I have no use for the kind of name that's bought with silence. The rider looked between them, then exhaled sharply and turned back to his horse. I'll tell him. You do that, Boone said. When the rider vanished behind the ridge, Boone set the rifle down on the porch rail. Kierra said nothing, just leaned into him, her head against his chest. That evening, rain came again, not a storm, just a soft soaking that slicked the fields and made the air smell rich with life. Boone lit the lamp and trimmed the wicklow. Kierra stood barefoot on the hearthstones, holding the finished calico dress she had stitched by hand, the one she'd been saving. I'd like to wear it now, she said. Not for church. Not for a crowd. Just for you. He crossed the room, took the dress from her hands, and laid it gently on the cot. Then he turned back to her. You've looked like my wife since the day you touched this land. She reached for him, fingers fitting between his as if they always had. That night, with the rain hushed against the roof and the fire casting soft shadows, Kierra laid her head on Boone's chest and listened to the rhythm of his breath. Slow. Certain. Calm. Years passed. Boone added 2 more rows of corn, and Kierra planted marigolds at the edge of the bean patch to ward off beetles. She taught 3 mornings a week at the schoolhouse down in Skull Valley, riding out as the sun climbed and returning with dust on her boots and pencil shavings in her pockets. Children left her bundles of dried flowers and hand-drawn pictures, and she saved each one. Boone built a cradle the winter they learned she was expecting. He carved a lark into the headboard. Their daughter was born in the spring, with a full head of dark hair and a cry that filled every corner of the cabin. They named her Clara after Boone's mother, and she grew strong on goat's milk, and lullabies hummed beneath the cottonwood at dusk. Neighbors came to know the Larks as quiet folk, steady, kind, the sort who would ride through a storm to help right a wagon or sit beside a sickbed through the night. Kierra's name never appeared in any paper, and Silas never sent another man. One evening some years later, Boone stood behind the house, watching Clara chase a chicken across the yard, her laugh high and fearless. Kierra came up beside him, pressing a jar of cool water into his hand. She's got your stubborn, he said, watching the bird dart beneath the rain barrel. She's got your heart, Kierra said softly, even when she doesn't know it. He looked at her, then her sun-browned face, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her body leaned toward his without thinking. I'd do it all again, he said. Every fence post. Every mile. She reached up, brushing a curl from his brow. So would I. The lantern still hung by the porch, its glass smudged now with time, but the flame inside burned clear. Boone lit it each evening without fail, not from habit, but from gratitude. It had once guided a girl through the dark. Now it marked the place she had chosen, not because she had to, but because she loved.